22nd, 1941, the war destroyed millions of families. But the most tragic page in history was the fate of children. More than 2.5 million young citizens of the USSR were searching for their relatives after the war. How did the state cope with this catastrophe? What fate awaited millions of orphans? And why did their numbers continue to grow even years after victory? Today, we will tell the incredible story of how an entire generation survived the most terrible years of the 20th century. If you are interested in this story, subscribe to our channel, where we tell little-known stories from Russian history. And in the comments, share your opinion. Could help for orphaned children have been better organized during the war? Or did the state do everything possible in those extreme conditions? In 1941, when German troops crossed the borders of the Soviet Union, few people imagined the tragedy that would befall the country's children. The war separated millions of families, turning children into refugees, orphans, and street kids. But even today, the exact figures of this catastrophe remain unknown. The chaos of those years was too great. According to official data, after the end of the Great Patriotic War, there were more than 600,000 orphaned children in the Soviet Union. However, this figure is only the tip of the iceberg. By 1945, the Central Children's Address and Reference Bureau, created to search for lost children, had about 2.5 million children on its books who were looking for their parents or relatives. The statistics are frightening in their scale. Between 1941 and 1944 alone, about 190,000 children lost contact with their parents. Many of them remained forever in the files of search services, alive, but never finding their families. The situation was particularly tragic in the early post-war years. Contrary to expectations, the number of homeless children not only did not decrease, but continued to grow. Hunger, devastation, epidemics, and the return of fathers crippled by war created new waves of child orphanhood. Only by the mid-1950s did this growth stop. The war made no distinction between adults and children. According to various estimates, between 500,000 and 1 million children died during the Great Patriotic War. Many of them added years to their age at the military registration offices and went off to fight alongside adults. But while the number of deaths has been roughly estimated, the number of broken childhoods remains unknown. In conditions of total mobilization and evacuation, children were often left to fend for themselves. Mothers worked in factories and hospitals, fathers fought at the front, and children survived as best they could. Many of them grew up in a matter of months, taking care of their younger brothers and sisters. The child welfare system, created in the pre-war years, was not prepared for such a scale of disaster. Children's homes were overcrowded, and there was a shortage of teachers, food, and clothing. In wartime, the state was forced to create new forms of care for orphaned children, many of which still exist today. On June 22, 1941, not only did the war begin, but also the greatest migration of children in human history. In the first weeks of the German offensive, millions of families were forced to leave their homes urgently. In the chaos of the evacuation, children were lost, separated from their parents, and found themselves in completely unfamiliar places without documents or means of subsistence. The evacuation took place amid the chaos of war. Trains were overcrowded, people were loaded into freight cars, and columns of pedestrians stretched for tens of kilometers. In this confusion, many children were lost. Some fell behind their parents at the train station, some got lost during the bombing, and some simply could not find their train among dozens of similar ones. The situation with children's institutions was particularly difficult. Orphanages, boarding schools, and sanatoriums were evacuated with entire groups. But on the way, many children were lost or died of illness. Caregivers could not always keep track of all their charges, especially when they had to change routes or transfer to other modes of transport. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that many parents were mobilized directly from the evacuation points. Fathers left for the front, leaving their wives and children in unfamiliar places without any means of subsistence. If the mother fell ill or died, the children were left completely defenseless. In the eastern regions of the country, where trains carrying evacuees arrived, local authorities were not prepared for such an influx of refugees. There was a shortage of housing, food, and medical care. Children often found themselves in overcrowded barracks or simply out in the open. In such conditions, many of them ran away, trying to find their way back to their homes or find their parents. Railway stations became gathering places for lost children. They lived in waiting rooms, on platforms, and in abandoned train cars. Older children took care of younger ones, creating improvised families. Many children learned to obtain food by any means necessary, begging from passengers, picking up leftovers, stealing. Local residents often showed sympathy for lost children, but not everyone was able to help. In wartime conditions, every family was struggling to survive. Nevertheless, many children were saved thanks to the compassion of ordinary people who took in strangers' children as their own. The evacuation system for children's institutions gradually improved, but the first months of the war claimed thousands of children's lives and destroyed the futures of many thousands of young citizens of the Soviet Union. By the end of 1941, there were real streams of children moving along the roads of the Soviet Union. Tens of thousands of homeless children traveled from north to south, hoping to find warmth and food there. They formed groups, created improvised convoys, and set up entire camps at major railway junctions. Anna Dmitrievna Kalinina's commission, which surveyed the areas liberated from the White Army in 1920, described a similar picture. But the scale of child homelessness during the Great Patriotic War exceeded anything the country had experienced before. Children moved in unorganized masses, following their instinct for self-preservation. These streams of children posed a serious problem for the military authorities. In some areas, the heads of evacuation points issued orders not to let homeless children pass, setting up roadblocks. The children were caught in a trap. Wherever they turned, they encountered weapons and prohibitions. In such conditions, the children became feral, resembling small animals. They learned to break through any barriers, obtain food by any means, and survive in unbearable conditions. The older ones took care of the younger ones, creating a peculiar hierarchy and rules for survival. The situation was particularly dire in Ukrainian cities. American journalist Whiting Williams, who visited the USSR in 1933, was struck by the hordes of homeless and hungry children. He saw a 9-year-old boy sitting among the rubbish at the Kharkov market, picking eggshells out of the dirt and trying to scrape out any leftovers. The next day, the journalist met him again in the same place, but the child was no longer moving. The police tried to combat child homelessness by organizing raids and transporting the captured children in carts to overcrowded orphanages. In May 1933 alone, 9,000 children were picked up from the streets of Kharkiv in a week. But the mortality rate in orphanages reached 30%. So many children preferred to run back to the streets. There were also some truly horrific practices. According to eyewitness accounts, street children were sometimes loaded into train cars, taken far away from the city, and released in the middle of nowhere. As Williams recounted, once 3 train cars with homeless children were pushed onto a sidetrack and forgotten about. When they were opened on the 3rd day, no one was left alive inside. The wartime streams of children were no less tragic. They moved along destroyed roads, through towns and villages, leaving a trail of human grief and despair behind them. These children saw the horrors of war, with eyes that should have seen only toys and books. On January 23, 1942, the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR adopted a resolution that was supposed to help reunite thousands of families separated by the war. The NKVD was tasked with helping parents and relatives search for their lost children. This marked the beginning of the work of the Addressable Children's Reference Desks, a unique search system that had no analogues in the world. The Central Addressable Children's Reference Desk was established under the main police department. Its card index collected information on all lost and found children throughout the Soviet Union. The creation of this institution was announced in the central press and on the radio, and soon thousands of letters from desperate parents began to arrive at the Bureau's address. The work of the address bureaus was organized with a precision unprecedented at that time. An index card was created for each child, indicating all possible distinguishing features, the circumstances of the loss, and the presumed whereabouts. By April 1, 1944, there were 422,272 index cards in the central desk's files. The employees of the address desks were true heroes of the home front. They sorted through mountains of letters from parents, checked the children's characteristics, and organized search operations. Many of these people worked practically without days off, understanding that human destinies depended on their work. The search system was organized on a territorial basis. Local address desks were set up in each region, province, and republic, which regularly exchanged information with the central office. This made it possible to respond quickly to incoming information and organize searches on the ground. The results of the address desk's work are impressive. As of June 1, 1944, a total of 41,107 children were registered as missing. Of these, 13,414 were found, almost 1 in 3. For wartime, this was an outstanding result. However, the work of the address desks faced many difficulties. Many children did not remember their real names or gave them incorrectly. Documents were lost, witnesses died, and entire settlements disappeared from the face of the earth. Sometimes the search for a single child took years. It was especially difficult to find children who had ended up in occupied territory or had been taken to Germany. Contact with these areas was lost, and after liberation it became clear that many children could no longer be found. Nevertheless, the work of the address desks continued after the end of the war. The address desk system became the prototype for modern missing person services. The experience gained during the war proved invaluable for organizing search operations in peacetime. Wartime orphanages were a special world where hundreds of thousands of orphans received shelter, food, and education. But conditions in these institutions were far from ideal. A lack of everything necessary, overcrowding, disease, and high mortality rates turned many orphanages into places where only the strongest survived. By the beginning of the war, there were about 4,000 orphanages in the Soviet Union, raising more than 400,000 children. But wartime required a radical expansion of this system. In just a few months, the number of children's institutions increased several times over. Orphanages were located in a wide variety of buildings: former schools, monasteries, manor houses, and even hastily converted barracks. Many institutions were 2 to 3 times overcrowded. Bedrooms designed for 20 children housed 50 or more. The children slept in 2 or 3 shifts, sharing one bed between several people. Food in orphanages was scarce and monotonous. Bread was rationed strictly and was often the only food available during the day. Vegetables, meat, and milk were extremely rare. Many children suffered from vitamin deficiency, rickets, and other diseases caused by malnutrition. The winter of 1941 to 1942 was particularly difficult. Some orphanages had no heating, and the children slept fully clothed, covering themselves with whatever they could find. The mortality rate among the children reached alarming levels. In some institutions, up to half of the children died. The teaching staff also faced enormous difficulties. Many experienced teachers were mobilized or evacuated. They were replaced by people without special education, often women who had lost their children in the war. They worked not for a salary, but from the heart, trying to replace the orphans' parents. There was strict discipline in the orphanages. The children got up when the bell rang, ate at set times, and performed their work duties. The older pupils helped to look after the younger ones and worked in workshops, vegetable gardens, and on the farm. This system not only ensured basic order, but also prepared the children for independent life. Despite all the difficulties, educational work was carried out in orphanages. Children learned to read and write, acquired professional skills, and participated in artistic activities. Many educators tried to create a family atmosphere for the orphans by organizing holidays, reading fairy tales, and simply talking with the children. Wartime orphanages became a school of life for an entire generation. Their pupils learned to appreciate every piece of bread, to value friendship, and to help the weak. They carried these qualities throughout their lives. The war turned children into a labor force. Teenagers aged 13 and 14 worked at machines, replacing their fathers who had gone to the front. In rural areas, children plowed the land, sowed grain, and harvested crops. During the war years, these young workers put in more than 585 million workdays. Factories and plants made special platforms for children so that they could reach the machines. 12-hour shifts were commonplace. Teenagers mastered the complex professions of turners, millers, and welders in a matter of weeks. Their small hands were especially needed in the production of precision parts for military equipment. In besieged Leningrad, children worked alongside adults in defense enterprises. They made gas masks, assembled machine guns, and manufactured ammunition. Many of these young workers did not live to see the end of the war. Hunger and back-breaking labor took children's lives faster than bullets. Children from orphanages were particularly actively involved in the work. Special work collectives were created for them to fulfill military orders. The children manufactured various parts, sewed military uniforms, and assembled parcels for soldiers at the front. This was not only a contribution to the victory, but also a way of instilling a work ethic. On June 15, 1943, the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR decided to organize educational labor colonies for juvenile offenders. During the war, more than 100,000 teenagers passed through these institutions. Many of them were not criminals, but simply children trying to survive in unbearable conditions. In agriculture, children replaced millions of adult workers. They herded cattle, worked in the fields, and tended vegetable gardens. Pioneer detachments organized entire labor brigades to help collective farms harvest crops. For many city children, this was their first encounter with rural labor. School children collected scrap metal and medicinal herbs and participated in the construction of defensive structures. Timur teams operated in the rear, helping the families of frontline soldiers. Children carried water, chopped wood, looked after babies, and read letters to illiterate elderly people. Child labor during wartime had its own specific characteristics. Teenagers grew up quickly and took responsibility for the results of their work. Many of them became mentors to new workers, passing on their production experience. Amazing relationships of mutual assistance and support developed in the workshops. The state tried to compensate children for their labor in some way. Young workers received food ration cards and were entitled to various benefits. But real care for children was often limited to formal measures. The needs of the front were too great. The labor heroism of the children of war became one of the components of victory. Their little hands forged weapons for soldiers, grew bread for starving cities, and sustained life in a devastated country. This feat is still underestimated by historians. The lives of children in the occupied territories turned into a daily struggle for survival. The German authorities regarded Slavic children as subhuman, unworthy of education, normal nutrition, and medical care. Many of them were doomed to a slow death from hunger and disease, while others were forced into labor or deported to Germany. Under the Ostplan, a significant part of the Slavic population was to be exterminated or deported. Children were assigned a special role in this plan. They were to be used as labor and then prevented from reproducing. Schools were closed and education was reduced to the minimum necessary to perform the simplest tasks. In occupied towns and villages, children were often left without parents. Fathers died at the front or in captivity. Mothers died of disease and exhaustion. Orphans wandered among the ruins, fed on scraps, and hid from German patrols. Many of them became feral, learning to steal and beg. The fate of children in the ghettos was especially terrible. Jewish children were subject to extermination along with adults. They were shot, gassed, and subjected to medical experiments. Only a few were saved thanks to the help of the local population or partisans. The German authorities organized the mass abduction of children to Germany. Children aged 10 to 14 were selected to work on farms and in factories. They were loaded into freight cars like cattle and taken to an unknown destination. Many died on the way from disease and exhaustion. Those who survived were destined to become slaves on German soil. In some regions, the occupiers selected children on the basis of race. Children with blonde hair and blue eyes were selected for Germanization. They were sent to special institutions where they had to forget their native language and learn German culture. It is believed that about 200,000 children were abducted in this way. Partisan detachments tried to rescue the children, but their capabilities were limited. Underground schools were set up in the forests, where children continued their education. The partisans organized children's camps and provided orphans with food and clothing. Many teenagers became scouts and couriers, helping adults in the fight against the occupiers. The local population often risked their lives to save other people's children. Peasants hid Jewish children, passing them off as their own. City dwellers sheltered orphans in basements and attics. Orthodox priests baptized Jewish children, giving them new names and documents. Children in the occupied territories learned early on about the cruelty and injustice of the world. They saw death, violence, and betrayal, but many of them retained their humanity and learned to value kindness and compassion. Their experiences became part of the historical memory of the people. After the liberation of these territories, it became clear that tens of thousands of children had disappeared without a trace. Some died of hunger and disease, others were killed by the occupiers, and still others remained in Germany forever. The exact number of child victims of the occupation is still unknown. Among the wartime orphans, a special category was made up of the children of the repressed, those whose parents were victims of political purges. The Great Terror of 1937 to 1938 left thousands of children without care, when not only their fathers, the enemies of the people, were arrested, but often their mothers as well. The fate of these children was particularly tragic. Not only were they deprived of their parents, but they also became outcasts of society. They were branded as children of enemies of the people, a label that haunted them throughout their lives. Many of them hid their origins, changed their surnames, and invented new biographies. On January 7, 1938, the NKVD of the USSR issued Circular Number 4 on the procedure for placing children whose parents were repressed under the guardianship of relatives. This document provided for strict verification of potential guardians by regional and provincial NKVD departments for the presence of compromising information. The NKVD authorities were instructed to monitor the moods, behavior, and acquaintances of the children of those arrested. An atmosphere of suspicion and fear was created, in which even children became objects of political control. Many relatives were afraid to take in the children of those who had been repressed, fearing for their own fate. It was extremely difficult for relatives who remained free or parents who had been released from prison to find and take back a child who had already been sent to an orphanage. Often, the children's surnames were incorrectly recorded or deliberately changed to hide their sinful origins. In orphanages, the children of repressed people were often discriminated against. Caregivers and other children treated them with suspicion, considering them potentially dangerous. This created additional psychological trauma for children who had already experienced the arrest and disappearance of their parents. Many of these children learned early on to keep silent about their past. They made up stories about fathers who had died at the front and mothers who had died of illness. Some really believed in these fictional biographies, trying to protect their psyche from traumatic memories. Paradoxically, the war became a kind of salvation for the children of repressed people. In the general tragedy, their personal misfortune was lost among millions of other children's sorrows. They could pass themselves off as ordinary war orphans, and no one questioned their stories about their dead parents. In the post-war years, the situation of the children of the repressed improved somewhat, but full rehabilitation came only after Stalin's death. Many of them were able to restore justice, find information about the fate of their parents, and obtain rehabilitation certificates. The children of the repressed often distinguished themselves by their particular fortitude and ability to endure hardship. They understood the injustice of the world at an early age and learned to rely only on themselves. Many of them subsequently achieved significant success in life, as if to compensate for their stolen childhood. The history of the children of the repressed is a lesson in how political repression destroys not only the lives of adults, but also cripples the destinies of innocent children. Their experience reminds us of the need to protect children's rights in all political circumstances. Paradoxically, the number of orphans in the Soviet Union did not decrease after victory, but continued to grow. May 1945 brought the country long-awaited peace, but did not bring relief to the fate of children. Post-war devastation, hunger, disease, and social upheaval created new waves of orphanhood. The return of soldiers from the front often became a tragedy for their families. Many fathers returned disabled, mentally scarred, unable to work and support their families. Alcoholism, depression, and family conflicts led to the breakdown of marriages and the emergence of new orphans with living parents. Demobilized soldiers often could not find work or housing. The ruined economy did not provide enough jobs. Men who had been to the front found it difficult to adjust to peaceful life. Their families fell apart, and their children ended up on the streets. The famine of 1946 to 1947 became a new ordeal for children. Drought and crop failure led to mass mortality among the adult population. Children lost their parents to starvation and disease, swelling the ranks of post-war orphans. In the western regions of the USSR, liberated from German occupation, thousands of children were found who had lost their parents during the war. Many of them lived in the basements of ruined houses, in dugouts, in forests. They became feral, forgot how to speak, and were afraid of people in uniform. The repatriation of Soviet citizens from Germany brought new problems. Many children who had been taken away for forced labor returned home to find that their families had died or disappeared. They became orphans in the literal sense of the word, without a home, without relatives, without documents. The orphanage system, already overloaded with war orphans, could not cope with the new influx of street children. Children's institutions were overcrowded and lacked staff, food, and clothing. Many children preferred to live on the streets rather than in overcrowded orphanages. In the post-war years, a new type of street child appeared. Children who had run away from orphanages in search of their families. They believed that their parents were alive and tried to find them. Many of them wandered around the country for years, hoping for a reunion that was never meant to happen. The state tried to combat post-war homelessness using various methods. New orphanages were created, existing institutions were expanded, and volunteers were recruited for educational work. But the scale of the problem required drastic measures. The growth in child orphanhood only stopped in the mid-1950s, when the country's economy began to recover. Improvements in the financial situation of families, the development of social services, and the creation of a system of benefits helped to reduce the number of homeless children. The post-war surge in child orphanhood was a reminder that war continues to kill even after the guns have fallen silent. Its consequences affect the lives of children for many years after the official end of the conflict. The system of educational institutions for orphans in the post-war USSR was a complex hierarchy of different types of institutions. Ordinary orphanages, special institutions for children with developmental disabilities, labor colonies for juvenile offenders, boarding schools. Each institution had its own specific characteristics and solved specific problems. The first type of orphanages was intended for healthy children of preschool and school age. Conditions were created in them that were as close as possible to family life. Children received education, vocational training, and participated in artistic activities. The best orphanages became model institutions that were shown to foreign delegations. Special orphanages were created for children with physical disabilities, developmental delays, and mental disorders. In the conditions of post-war devastation, these institutions were in a particularly difficult situation. There was a shortage of specialists in special education, medical equipment, and special educational programs. Labor camps were intended for juvenile offenders. Children between the ages of 12 and 16 who had committed theft, hooliganism, or other crimes were sent to these institutions for up to 3 years. The regime in the camps was strict. The children worked in production and received vocational training. Boarding schools were an intermediate link between regular schools and orphanages. They took in children from dysfunctional families who were not formally orphans, but needed constant supervision. This form of child care became widespread in the 1950s. In the post-war years, an attempt was made to create family-style orphanages. In these, one caregiver replaced the children's mother, creating a warmer atmosphere. Children of different ages lived as brothers and sisters, helping each other and learning family relationships. The foster care system covered about 350,000 children. Families voluntarily took in orphans, receiving state assistance. This was an alternative to orphanages, allowing children to grow up in a family environment. Many foster families adopted their foster children. Vocational training was a mandatory part of education in children's institutions. Children mastered various professions: carpentry, metalwork, sewing, and cooking. Many orphanages had their own workshops, farms, and vegetable gardens. The children not only learned to work, but also provided their institutions with products. Special attention was paid to ideological education. Children studied the history of the party, participated in pioneer and Komsomol organizations, and prepared for life in a socialist society. Many children's home pupils became active builders of communism. The material situation of children's institutions gradually improved. New buildings equipped with modern equipment were constructed. Nutrition, medical care, and cultural activities improved. By the end of the 1950s, orphanages had become quite decent institutions. However, problems remained. Many orphanage pupils found it difficult to adapt to independent life. They lacked life experience, the ability to build personal relationships, and the skills to solve everyday problems. The stigma of having grown up in a children's home often haunted them throughout their lives. The fates of wartime children's home graduates varied. Some were able to overcome the difficulties of their childhood and achieve significant success, while others struggled with the consequences of childhood trauma throughout their lives. But they all shared a special attitude towards life, forged in the crucible of wartime hardship. Many orphanage pupils chose military service. The Army gave them structure, discipline, and a sense of belonging to a community. Everything they lacked in childhood. Quite a few orphanage pupils became professional soldiers, rose to high ranks, and participated in post-war conflicts. Industry actively recruited orphanage graduates. They formed the backbone of the working class in the 1950s and 1960s. Their work ethic, frugality, and ability to work in a team made them valuable assets to the recovering economy. Some orphanage residents managed to obtain higher education and became teachers, doctors, engineers, and scientists. They were distinguished by their particular determination and diligence. They understood the value of education, cherished the knowledge they had acquired, and often became the best specialists in their fields. The personal lives of orphanage graduates were not easy. Many of them did not know how to build trusting relationships, were afraid of attachment, and had difficulty starting families. The orphanage habit of collectivism often interfered with intimacy in marital relationships. At the same time, there were many strong, close-knit families among orphanage residents. Having experienced deprivation in childhood, they especially valued family warmth and created for their children the atmosphere of love and care that they themselves had been deprived of. Their children were often particularly responsive and kind. Many orphanage residents maintained contact with their classmates throughout their lives. The orphanage brotherhood was a real family for them. They helped each other in difficult times, rejoiced in their comrades' successes, and celebrated holidays together. Those who managed to find their relatives after leaving the orphanage were in a special category. Meetings with relatives they had not seen for decades often proved painful. Over the years of separation, people had changed and become strangers. It was not always possible to restore family ties. Some orphanage graduates dedicated their lives to working with children. They became educators, teachers, and social workers. Their own experiences helped them understand the problems of orphans, find ways to approach them, and create an atmosphere of trust and support. In adulthood, many orphanage residents began searching for their roots. They studied archives, searched for documents, and tried to reconstruct their family histories. For them, this was important not only out of curiosity, but also for the sake of finding their personal identity. The children of war who had been through orphanages became a special generation. They were distinguished by their fortitude, ability to endure hardship, and appreciation of simple human joys. Many of them lived dignified lives, raised good children, and contributed to the development of the country. By the end of the 20th century, there were many distinguished people among the graduates of wartime orphanages, heroes of labor, famous figures in culture and science, and business leaders. Their biographies became proof that even the most difficult childhood trials can be overcome with strength of will and character. There were significant regional differences in how the problem of child orphanhood was addressed during the war and the post-war period. The central regions of Russia, which became the main evacuation sites, faced one set of problems. The frontline areas faced another, and the territories liberated from occupation faced yet another. By the end of the war, there were 81 orphanages in the Sverdlovsk region, where about 6,000 children were raised. The Ural region was the main place of evacuation for children's institutions from the western regions. Temporary orphanages were set up here in unsuitable premises, former churches, manor houses, and factory buildings. The situation was particularly difficult in the Perm region. Local orphanages took in not only evacuated children, but also street children from Siberia. In the conditions of the Ural winter, the problem of heating was particularly acute. In many orphanages, the temperature in the bedrooms dropped below zero. The Siberian regions faced a huge influx of street children who were moving from the west in search of warmth and food. The railway stations of Novosibirsk, Omsk, and Krasnoyarsk became gathering places for street children. Local authorities organized mass raids and forcibly placed children in overcrowded institutions. In the Tatar ASSR, the number of orphanages more than doubled during the war. A system of labor education was developed here. Orphanages had subsidiary farms, workshops, and school plots. The pupils provided themselves with food and necessary items. After liberation from occupation, the Ukrainian regions faced a catastrophic situation. Most of the orphanage buildings were destroyed, and the staff had been killed or taken to Germany. Children's institutions had to be created literally from scratch, using basements and dilapidated buildings. In the first years after liberation, Belarusian orphanages resembled military hospitals. Many children were wounded, shell-shocked, or suffered from mental disorders. It was necessary not only to provide them with shelter and food, but also to give them serious medical and psychological help. In the Baltic republics, the orphanage system was rebuilt after joining the USSR. Here, there was a different tradition of caring for orphans, based on private charity and church guardianship. The Soviet system of collective upbringing was difficult to implement. The Caucasian republics had their own peculiarities in solving the problem of orphanhood. Family and clan traditions were strong here, and many orphans were raised in extended families of relatives. Orphanages were created mainly for children who had no relatives. The Far Eastern regions faced the problem of children of Soviet citizens repatriated from China and other countries. These children often did not know the Russian language and had different cultural traditions, which created additional difficulties in their upbringing. In the Leningrad region, after the lifting of the blockade, there was a special category of children, blockade children, who had survived the siege of the city. Many of them suffered from malnutrition and had serious health problems. Special therapeutic children's homes with enhanced nutrition and medical supervision were created for them. The Moscow region, where many children's institutions were evacuated, became a kind of coordination center for the placement of orphaned children. Here, educational methods were developed, which were then disseminated throughout the country. The northern regions, Arkhangelsk Oblast and the Komi ASSR, took in evacuated children in harsh climatic conditions and with limited resources. Here, the problem of providing children with warm clothing and high-calorie food was particularly acute. Each region developed its own methods of solving the problem of child orphanhood, taking into account local conditions and capabilities. This experience became the basis for the creation of a nationwide system of children's institutions in the post-war years. International assistance in solving the problem of child orphanhood in the USSR was limited, but in some cases played an important role. The allies of the anti-Hitler coalition provided support to Soviet children, although the scale of this assistance was incomparable to the needs of the country. American aid under Lend-Lease included not only military supplies, but also humanitarian cargo. Medicines, vitamins, and powdered milk were delivered to the USSR for use in orphanages. Particularly valuable were deliveries of penicillin and other antibiotics, which saved thousands of children's lives. The British Red Cross organized a fundraiser to help Soviet children. The money raised was spent on medical equipment, vitamins, and children's clothing. British women's organizations knitted sweaters and socks for Soviet orphans, showing human solidarity in difficult times. International Jewish organizations played a special role in saving Jewish children. The Joint Distribution Committee and other charitable foundations sent money and medicine to children rescued from the Holocaust. This aid often came through underground channels and saved many children's lives. The Swedish Red Cross was one of the few international organizations that had direct contact with the Soviet side. The Swedes supplied medicines, organized the evacuation of sick children to their hospitals, and helped search for missing children through neutral territory. After the war ended, international aid intensified. UNRRA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, provided the USSR with materials for the restoration of children's institutions. Building materials, medical equipment, and teaching aids were supplied. The International Red Cross organized the exchange of information about missing children between the Allied countries. This helped to find and repatriate thousands of Soviet children who had ended up abroad. Many of them were returned from Germany, where they had been forced into labor. Church organizations in Western countries also provided assistance to Soviet children. The Catholic Church, despite ideological differences with the Soviet regime, delivered humanitarian aid through neutral countries. Protestant churches organized fundraisers for Soviet orphans. The French resistance maintained contact with Soviet partisans and delivered aid to the children of partisan units. After the liberation of France, this aid became official. The French government allocated funds for the restoration of children's institutions in the USSR. Canadian trade unions organized fundraising for Soviet orphans. Canadian Ukrainians were particularly active in this activity, collecting money and sending parcels to the liberated areas of Ukraine. Aid also came from Soviet citizens who had been abroad before the war. The first wave of emigrants, despite their political differences with the Soviet authorities, donated money to help children in their homeland. Their human compassion proved stronger than their political convictions. International organizations helped repatriate Soviet children from concentration camps. After the camps were liberated by Allied forces, thousands of Soviet children were found there in terrible condition. Their treatment and transportation to the USSR required international efforts. Although Soviet propaganda tried not to publicize foreign aid, it played an important role in saving many children's lives. International solidarity manifested itself in the most difficult years for the country, showing that caring for children unites people of different nationalities and beliefs. Post-war cooperation in the field of child protection laid the foundations for the creation of international organizations for the protection of children's rights. The experience of helping Soviet orphaned children became part of the formation of the modern system of international humanitarian aid. The memories of the war generation about their childhood are made up of contradictory recollections. On the one hand, there are memories of hunger, cold, fear, and loneliness. On the other hand, there are memories of human kindness, camaraderie, and the joy of small gifts and holidays. These people learned to appreciate simple human joys and carried these qualities throughout their lives. Valentina Ivanovna Politova, a pupil at the Usolye orphanage, recalled, "We wore canvas shoes with wooden soles. The mattresses were stuffed with straw, and rags kept coming out of them. But we thought this was normal life. We didn't know any different." For children of the war years, harsh conditions were natural. Memories of hunger were especially painful. The children remembered every crumb of bread, every spoonful of porridge. Vladimir Petrovich Baginsky said, "At the end of 5th grade, we were given birth certificates with an extra 2 years added and sent to work. No one protested. They understood that this was necessary." The children in the orphanages remembered the strict regime, but did not complain about it. Waking up to the bell, compulsory exercises, and working in the workshops and vegetable gardens were perceived as a necessary part of life. Discipline helped them survive in difficult conditions and prepared them for adult life. Warm memories are associated with the teachers who replaced the children's parents. Many of them worked not for a salary, but from the heart. The children remembered their kindness, patience, and desire to create at least a semblance of a family atmosphere in the harsh conditions of the orphanage. The children in the orphanage especially cherished friendship. In the absence of a family, their friends became the only people close to them. Many of them stayed in touch throughout their lives, helped each other in difficult times, and celebrated holidays together. Memories of rare holidays and gifts were joyful. The New Year's tree, a concert for frontline soldiers, a parcel from a sponsoring enterprise. All this was remembered for a lifetime. Children of the war era knew how to enjoy the little things that modern children would not notice. The search for parents remained a painful topic. Many children's home residents hoped to find their relatives throughout their lives, even though they understood that they were most likely no longer alive. Some managed to find distant relatives, but the meetings often turned out to be painful. The children of war recalled how early they had to grow up. At the age of 12 or 13, they were already working alongside adults, caring for younger children, and making serious decisions. Their childhood ended in the first days of the war. They have special memories of their education. Despite all the difficulties, education continued in the orphanages. The children studied by candlelight, wrote on scraps of paper, but strove for knowledge. Education was seen as the path to a better life. Memories of the death of their comrades were traumatic. Children of wartime became acquainted with death at an early age, seeing their peers die of hunger and disease. These memories haunted them throughout their lives. At the same time, children of war remembered the amazing human kindness of ordinary people. Farmers shared their last piece of bread, railway workers let them warm up in their warm rooms, and teachers spent their free time teaching the children. This kindness warmed the children's souls in the most difficult times. Gradually, the painful memories faded, and the bright ones became brighter. The children of war learned to find the good, even in the most difficult circumstances. Their stories about childhood are a lesson in resilience and love of life for the modern generation. Many of them said that their difficult childhood tempered their character, taught them to appreciate the simple joys of life, and to value human relationships. They did not regret their childhood, considering it a school of life that helped them become strong people. The experience of solving the problem of child orphanhood during the Great Patriotic War and the post-war period became an important lesson for subsequent generations. The system, created in extreme conditions, showed both the capabilities of the state apparatus and its limitations in caring for children. The main lesson was an understanding of the scale of the problem. The war showed that child orphanhood could take on catastrophic proportions and require the mobilization of all state resources. The peacetime system proved unprepared for such challenges and required radical reform. The wartime experience proved the effectiveness of a centralized approach to solving social problems. Unified leadership, clear planning, and strict control made it possible to quickly create a network of children's institutions and save hundreds of thousands of children's lives. However, centralization also had its negative sides: bureaucracy, formalism, and a lack of individual approach. An important lesson was the understanding of the role of local authorities in solving the problem of orphanhood. Where local leaders showed initiative and responsibility, children's institutions worked better. Where formalism and indifference prevailed, the situation of children was catastrophic. The war experience showed the importance of public support for children's institutions. Sponsorship from enterprises, assistance from collective farms, and participation from public organizations helped solve the material problems of orphanages. The state alone could not cope with such a large-scale task. The system of address tables demonstrated the possibilities of an organized search for lost children. Their experience was used in the creation of modern services for searching for missing persons. However, the effectiveness of the search depended on the preservation of documents and witness testimony. The labor education of orphans proved to be an effective method of preparing them for independent life. Children who acquired professional skills in orphanages adapted more easily to adult life. However, the use of child labor often exceeded reasonable limits and was harmful to health. The experience of placing orphanages in unsuitable premises showed the importance of material and technical resources. Overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, and the lack of basic amenities had a negative impact on the health and development of children. Saving money on children's institutions resulted in great losses. The staffing problem proved to be one of the most difficult. The shortage of qualified educators, frequent staff turnover, and low salaries led to a deterioration in the quality of educational work. Investing in staff training would have been more effective than saving on salaries. An important lesson was the understanding of the psychological problems of orphaned children. War trauma, the loss of parents, and unstable living conditions required special psychological assistance. However, at that time, such assistance was practically non-existent. Regional differences in addressing the problem demonstrated the importance of taking local conditions into account. Nationwide standards did not always correspond to the real capabilities of the regions. A flexible approach was needed, taking into account climatic, economic, and cultural characteristics. International cooperation in the field of child protection proved effective even in wartime. Humanitarian aid saved thousands of children's lives. This experience became the basis for the development of an international system for the protection of children's rights. The long-term consequences of childhood orphanhood became apparent decades later. Many of the problems faced by orphanage graduates, difficulties in starting a family, alcoholism, social maladjustment, were the result of childhood trauma. Preventing these problems required a deeper understanding of the psychology of orphaned children. The experience of wartime showed that the problem of child orphanhood cannot be solved solely by creating institutions. A comprehensive approach is needed, including the prevention of orphanhood, support for families in difficult situations, the development of family-based forms of child placement, and psychological assistance. The main lesson of the history of war children is a lesson in human resilience. Children who survived the horrors of war and orphanhood managed to survive, get an education, start families, and raise children. Their experience shows that even in the most difficult conditions, it is possible to preserve humanity and find the strength to create.